Everyone for joining us this evening for this important, timely, and indeed necessary webinar. My name is Juba Salibi. I'm a research fellow at Oxford University, and I will be introducing the speakers and moderating the discussion and the webinar. I would like to first say that the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK expresses and offers its deep condolences and solidarity to the Syrian and Turkish people for the thousands of lives lost in the earthquake and for the devastation it caused. So the earthquake has claimed the lives of thousands, left tens of thousands injured and hundreds of thousands without shelter or home, and caused massive scale of destruction. In Syria in particular, the earthquake has compounded layers upon layers of a humanitarian crisis. Yet, as we see, the humanitarian response to the earthquake has disproportionately disregarded Syrian suffering and people's need for aid. We are faced with the ugly politicization of humanitarianism, which continues to undermine people's access to basic human rights. Western sanctions in particular on Syria have been one of the obstacles for aid delivery to the places affected by the earthquake, and a reason for the late response of international humanitarian agencies and actors. We see almost immediately after the earthquake hit, several countries, almost immediately after the earthquake hit, several countries sent aid and rescue teams to Turkey, but offered very little or nothing to Syria. This only proves that some disasters are worthy of a humanitarian intervention than others, based on the ethnic, political, and social value of the people affected. Moreover, while the sanctions are supposed to punish and harm and target the Syrian regime, in reality, as we are seeing now, Syrian people are the ones who are paying the price for these sanctions. Moreover, in the opposition-controlled areas, in particular, in the northern parts of Syria, they are facing even more obstacles and challenges because of al-Assad's regime's continuous oppression. So the Syrian civil defense teams, like the White Helmets, and we have speakers who will from the White Helmet who will be talking about it later. So in the opposition areas, they are hampered with many challenges, namely the inadequate infrastructure, border closures, and the regime's ongoing repression. It also should be mentioned that in places like Idlib, for example, many of the people affected were already internally displaced because of the civil war. They are now dealing with both the tragic consequences of the earthquake, as well as with the al-Assad regime's ongoing repression. But lastly, and most importantly, the miserable failure of the international humanitarian aid in responding quickly and swiftly to the tragic earthquake exposes the selective empathy of the international community, where certain lives are valued over others. Humanitarian aid should be based on justice and equality for all. As I mentioned before, we have speakers from the White Helmets who will be talking more about the specific challenges that they're facing in the opposition areas. I will be now introducing our speakers by the order in which they will be speaking. So first we have Raed Al-Saleh, the head of the Syrian Civil Defense, the White Helmets. We have Sakan Salima Yanbo, member of the European Parliament, and then Robert Ford, a former US ambassador to Syria. Edmond Gharib, professor of international relations at Georgetown University, Washington. Gabriel Sauma, professor of Middle East Studies at Fairleigh Dickinson University, former member of President Trump's advisory board. Nabil Khouri, former director of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, Department of State. Tom Harb, American analyst and former co-chair of the American Mideast Coalition for Democracy, and Farouk Habib, deputy director of the White Helmets. So it seems that Ra'ad Saleh is not joining. So should we start with Salima?
Please, we can start with Mr. Farouk.
No, yeah, this is Farouk, Deputy Head for External Affairs. He's not joining.
Okay, so Farouk will start, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, please, Farouk, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The politicization of this whole situation serves no one but the lords of war who try to use the suffering of the Syrian people to amplify their political gains and try to achieve even further gains. We as Syrian people have been abandoned for a long time. We called for the world to help us to deal with the roots of the cause, and which led to this very weak infrastructure and community resilience in most of the part of Syria. The earthquake should remind the whole work of the importance of strengthening local structures to be able to deal with natural disasters. And while we definitely we are disappointed with this unfair treatment and unbalanced response to the needs of the people affected with the earthquake, we still call for humanitarian assistance for all people affected in the regime-controlled areas and in the opposition-controlled areas and in Turkey, indeed. Our frustration because of the failure of the UN and the different international agencies to help the people in northwest Syria does not mean in any way that we don't want them to aid to help our fellow brothers and sisters in the other parts of Syria. But it's not understandable for us why the first it's not justified for us. First, why the UN agencies wait for Bashar al-Assad to authorize them to help the life-saving efforts, or to the Security Council, which requires the authorization from Putin. First, and second, why the other countries are so happy to blame the UN for everything and attribute all the responsibility on the UN as if they can do nothing without it. Many countries have the means inside Syria or in the neighboring countries to provide assistance immediately to help us to rescue more people. And they didn't. Everybody is happy to wait and point fingers at the UN. I believe most of the people agree that there is a problem in the UN system. It's not functioning well. Definitely, it's not meeting the expectations of the beneficiaries, especially at the emergency times. But there could be other ways to help us rescue people. Many people died under rubble needlessly. There were ways to get them alive, and we lacked the support as we lacked it all the previous years.
Thank you so much, Farouk. We would like to also extend our solidarity with the White Helmets and for the amazing work that you're doing alone now, trying to do rescue operations, especially in northwest Syria, where the situation is even more difficult. And your point about delivering aid for all Syrians is, of course, important and necessary. No person in Syria should be left alone without being helped or rescued in any way. and the international community failed in delivering that aid for all Syrians equally, as they are doing, or the same amount of help that they are doing for Turkey is lacked when it comes to Syria, which is a big failure from the international community. Thank you so much, Farouk, for your time. And we will go now to our next speaker, Salima, who's a member of Salima Yanbu, who is a member of the European Parliament. I would like to ask you a question, actually, Salima, and maybe your intervention can be a response to that question. And also, I think Salima will be speaking in French, so we have a translator.
Yes.
Yes, Mariam.
So Mariam will be translating to English, right?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. So my question for Salima is that the European Union and European Parliament have made many attempts to find a solution, but the tragic reality in Syria now shows that. Do you want me to continue the question and translate it then, or?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The tragic reality in Syria now shows that these attempts failed. When do you think the international community and the European Union will take serious steps at the level of governments and at the level of the European Parliament to end the suffering of the Syrian people, which has been going on for almost 11 years now?
Madame Yambou, vous m'entendez?
Oui, bonjour, je vous entends.
Alors du coup, ils vous ont posé une question, je vous la traduis. Ils ont soit vous répondez à cette question, vous introduisez votre texte, mais je vous dis la question. Le fait est que on a constaté que l'Union européenne, et le Parlement européen ont essayé de trouver des solutions pour aider la Syrie, et que malheureusement, au vu des faits, c'était les tentatives n'ont pas abouti. Donc ma question c'est est-ce que vous avez une idée de quand il y aurait des solutions possibles et comment est-ce qu'il y aurait de sérieuses étapes qui pourraient être franchies par l'Union européenne pour pouvoir atteindre les objectifs qui ont été mis en place?
Oui, bonjour. Je voudrais quand même commencer par exprimer ma tristesse et ma compassion face au drame qui a touché les peuples syriens et turcs. Et j'ai une pensée très émue pour toutes les victimes de ce terrible séisme et je souhaite exprimer mes condoléances à leurs familles. Alors, des réponses? Sorry.
She would like just to start before answering anything. She would just like to express her compassion and her sadness for all the families and the people who are facing such trouble and difficulties. And she's especially thinking about the victims of this earthquake and to share her sadness with the families.
Alors, pour répondre en partie à la question, en mars 2021, le Parlement européen a adopté à une grande majorité une résolution qui demandait notamment un plan d'action contre l'impunité du régime syrien, et, par exemple en collectant des données. Mais aussi, l'Union européenne a déclenché récemment, dans ces jours-là, a déclenché le dispositif intégré pour une réaction au niveau politique dans les situations de crise en mode activation totale pour coordonner les mesures de soutien de l'UE en étroite collaboration avec la Commission européenne. Et cette commission, l'Europe a aussi décidé d'organiser une conférence des donateurs afin de mobiliser des fonds de la communauté internationale, et ça répond à la question, en faveur des populations turques, mais aussi et surtout, je dirais, syriennes. Donc, c'est une partie de la réponse, et je vais essayer si j'ai la possibilité, de parler aussi de manière générale de tout ce qui s'est passé ces quelques jours.
So Mrs. Yenbu is explaining, to answer your question, that in March 2021, there was a resolution adopted in the European Parliament and an action plan against the impunity of the Syrian regime. They also put a defense for the crisis situation that was adopted by the European Commission. And so all of those were to help and to answer your question. But she wants also now to speak more generally about what happened in the last days.
Donc, alors moi j'aimerais bien faire des rappels parce que là on est sur une situation qui est très complexe puisque c'est une catastrophe naturelle qui se joue en Syrie, mais c'est surtout une catastrophe humanitaire et quelque part c'est un peu une crise dans la crise. Et donc, je voudrais faire quelques rappels que d'autres invités feront aussi sur la Syrie. La Syrie d'avant le séisme. Donc, c'est un pays, un peuple qui a connu la plus forte répression des manifestations du printemps arabe. On a documenté 500 000 morts par l'ONU et l'Union européenne a mis des sanctions qui concernent 200 personnes et 70 entités dont les activités sont liées à la technologie de surveillance, qui ont profité de la guerre, enfin de la répression, du conflit ou qui ont pillé le pays. Alors, les sanctions ne concernent pas l'aide humanitaire. Ça, on n'arrête pas de le répéter. Le commissaire européen Janez Lenarčič l'a encore répété. Jamais les sanctions, que ce soit contre la Russie ou contre la Syrie, ne concernent l'aide humanitaire. Jamais. Donc, je voudrais aussi rappeler que la Russie a bombardé systématiquement les hôpitaux. Elle a utilisé des missiles pour raser des quartiers entiers, comme elle le fait d'ailleurs aujourd'hui en Ukraine. On voit qu'il y a vraiment une similitude. Il y a les attaques chimiques de 2013 qui ont fait 2500 morts, qui sont documentées à l'ONU. Et cette documentation a été faite par la France, avec des preuves que l'armement venait du régime syrien. Donc, le régime syrien se moque royalement du droit international. 7 millions de Syriens ont quitté le pays et on considère aujourd'hui que la Syrie n'est pas un pays sûr. Je vous laisse peut-être traduire.
Ouais. So now what's happening in the last days is the natural disaster, but this is also something happening in the case of a natural humanitarian disaster. So it's a crisis inside a crisis. And there was, before the earthquake, the Syrians were facing the worst repression after the manifestation of the Arab Spring. 5,000 dead were reported by the UN, and the European Union put sanctions, which were about 200 people and 70 entities. That activities were dedicated to technology and about technologies that were benefiting from the war or to steal the country. The sanctions were not concerning the humanitarian aid, and this was set for. And she wanted also to talk about Russia, which was bombarding systematically hospitals. There was over 600 attacks who used missiles to eradicate complete areas, so that she's doing now in Ukraine. And chemicals attacks as well in 2013, which made 2,500 dead. And all of this was documented by the UN and by France itself, and there were proofs that the weapons were coming from the Syrian regime. The Syrian regime was not respecting the Convention of Geneva and was targeting ambulances and doctors, and over 7 million of people were left the country because it was not considered anymore a safe country.
Merci beaucoup. Je poursuis. Alors là, je suis pas trop d'accord avec ce qui a été dit avant, c'est que les Nations Unies et les agences qui sont présentes sur place ont quand même réagi très rapidement en envoyant des experts, des sauveteurs, des denrées, du matériel de secours. Et je rappelle que c'est l'Union européenne qui finance majoritairement le budget humanitaire des Nations Unies. Et là où je partage complètement ce qui a été dit, c'est qu'effectivement, il devrait y avoir d'autres pays qui participent et ne le font pas. Et c'est pour ça que cette aide humanitaire n'est pas peut-être pas suffisante en cas de crise. Donc, on a apporté notre aide. J'ai lu ces derniers jours qu'il y avait des interrogations par rapport à l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire en Syrie. Ça a pris plus de temps pour la Syrie que pour la Turquie. Et c'est vrai, c'est factuel, c'est vrai. Mais dans un premier temps, l'acheminement de l'aide, quelle qu'elle soit, à la Syrie, était compliqué en raison des difficultés logistiques dans un pays qui est en conflit. Mais aussi, depuis 2018, un seul point d'entrée à Bab el-Hawa qui permettait d'acheminer les aides humanitaires. Et je rappelle encore une fois que c'est la Russie qui prend en otage ces points d'entrée. Elle a utilisé 20 vétos à l'ONU pour aider le régime syrien à étouffer la résistance. Et depuis 2016, elle a même apporté une aide militaire en installant une base militaire en Syrie. Donc, par contre, on a laissé des points d'entrée pour le commerce et pour les personnes. Donc, on a bloqué les aides humanitaires. Et c'est la Russie et la Chine qui ont fait ça. Je vous laisse traduire peut-être.
Oui. So it was, she was not exactly agreeing with what was said before. She said that in the UN there was some help that was made in the European Union, that was help that was given as fast as possible. And yes, it took some time because they took more time to go to bring help to Syria than to bring it to Turkey. But this was because of the situation. That was not the same in Turkey and in Syria. It was hard to find the entrance point. There was one in Bab el-Hawa, and that was controlled by Russia. But where she agrees is that there was other countries who should have come and help and assist. So this was something which had to be done. She heard a lot in those last days, those questions about and critics about how to bring help to Syria. But she's also talking about the fact that Russia was taking hostage those entry points and used 20 veto to the UN to help the Syrian regime to block the resistance or to little it.
Alors, le jour du tremblement, Bab el-Hawa a été considéré des deux côtés de la frontière comme non opérationnel. Et pendant 3 jours, et en fait, ces 3 jours étaient vraiment cruciaux pour sauver des vies sous les décombres. Aujourd'hui, hier, je crois, 2 nouveaux points de passage ont été ouverts entre la Turquie et le nord-ouest de la Syrie pour 3 mois. Et évidemment, il est nécessaire de soutenir la population syrienne dans ce drame et d'utiliser tous les moyens dont nous disposons. Mais je crois, et c'est important, qu'il faut souligner les différents enjeux, ou plutôt le dilemme qui pèse sur cette question. Aujourd'hui, comment aider la population syrienne sans légitimer un dictateur responsable de graves crimes contre sa population et que nous avions mis au banc de la scène internationale. Donc, oui, nous devons aider les populations victimes du séisme. Oui, l'aide humanitaire doit être fournie à ces populations et rapidement. Mais on ne peut pas accepter de travailler main dans la main avec Bachar el-Assad, de coopérer avec ce régime qui est dangereux et qui serait contraire à notre engagement en faveur de la démocratie et des droits humains, mais aussi contraire aux souhaits de nombreux Syriens qui m'écrivent depuis quelques jours pour dire « attention, on ne veut pas ça ». J'entends aussi parler de retirer les sanctions contre le régime d'Assad, mais non, les sanctions n'empêchent pas l'aide humanitaire et elles doivent être maintenues. Les retirer, ça serait, franchement, ça ne changerait rien à l'aide humanitaire, mais qui est surtout empêchée par le régime syrien, aidé par la Russie, mais ça serait une manière de légitimer ce régime.
Just a second before you go ahead with the translation, Mariam. We only have 7 minutes, and I think after we can what Salima shared, can you also tell her that maybe she can say like a closing note at the end, just because we don't have enough time for all.
Okay, I will just translate what you said first, and then I will translate what she said.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Je voulais juste vous faire noter que le temps imparti est assez court et qu'on est déjà à 7 minutes, donc après que je puisse traduire ce que vous venez de dire.
Ouais, d'accord.
Voilà, c'est tout. Si vous pouvez faire un point final pour expliquer
Oui.
et finir votre partie.
D'accord, je le fais tout de suite ou vous finissez?
Non, d'abord, je vais traduire ce que vous avez dit. Ensuite, vous pouvez terminer.
Merci.
Je vous en prie. So first, she was saying that the Bab el Hawa was not available. It was not possible to pass the help from this point. So they were trying to find some new points, and it was necessary to pass by any mean that was possible to achieve and to help the Syrians. And but the problem was the main problem was how to help Syrians without having to support the authoritarian regime, because obviously to help them there is no way to be able to co-opt with Bashar al-Assad and to work with him. The point is not to support him, never. And this is again against the wish of the Syrians who are communicating with her. No way for them to accept that. So and to help, there is no way to hold the sanctions that were against Bashar al-Assad. Never it happened. So this was the problem also that it was faced. So helping the Syrians without having to support Bashar al-Assad and his regime.
Alors, je voudrais juste rappeler que les principaux alliés du régime syrien aujourd'hui, c'est la Russie et l'Iran. Et quelle image nous enverrions à ces régimes en acceptant de normaliser nos relations avec Bachar al-Assad. Donc, pour nous aujourd'hui, pour l'Union européenne, l'enjeu, c'est de continuer de renforcer l'aide à la population syrienne, et j'espère que ces deux passages vont y contribuer, mais tout en maintenant Bachar al-Assad à l'isolement. Et l'idée, c'est de passer par des partenaires fiables qui sont déjà sur place, notamment les ONG et les agences des Nations Unies, en leur donnant bien plus de moyens. C'est important de renforcer cette aide et surtout de nous assurer qu'elle n'est pas détournée. On a vu des vidéos à Damas, il se vend déjà des aides, de l'aide humanitaire, elles se vendent déjà à Damas. Donc on sait, on n'est pas naïf, on sait très bien que ça va être détourné, mais il faut en donner encore plus massivement pour qu'il en passe le plus massif pour la population, et aussi tout le matériel de déblaiement. Je sais que c'est en cours, parce que ça, on a pris énormément de retard, donc c'est en cours. Donc aujourd'hui, la question et le dilemme qui se pose à l'Union européenne et la plupart des États, c'est continuer à faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour apporter de l'aide à la population syrienne et ne pas mettre de côté la question syrienne dans tous nos débats, et ça répond un peu à la question du début.
Pardon, juste pour vous redemander, vous avez dit que les principaux alliés étaient qui?
L'Iran et la Russie.
L'Iran et la Russie. So the last point to close what she was saying is that she was reminding the allies of the Syria was the main allies was Iran and Russia, and now what to do, that we want to continue and to make stronger the aid for Syria and for the Syrian people, and to have some reliable partners who are already there, which are NGOs, and United Nations. So helping them, making them stronger, being with them, and not having not really ONGs, because they have people who are offering their help, but it's not really the NGOs, it's other people under, and so they want to bring some also more material to help to get away from the rebels, but this takes time, and they know it, but they're trying to work on that to make it faster and help the people who are already there, already working on this. And now the question at the parliament is how to continue the help now without, and make everything they can for helping Syrians without having to talk about the whole Syrian problem now. So this is to go back to the first point, is to continue helping without making talking about the whole Syrian problem.
Thank you so much, Salima and Miriam, for translating. Salima, thank you so much for the efforts that you're making to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people, and thank you for your time and support, we really appreciate it. Now we will move to our next speaker, who's Robert Ford, a former US ambassador to Syria. And Robert, I would also like to pose a question to you, and your intervention could be a comment on that question or an answer, your answer to it. So the US has great power in Syria, but we also see that it's trying to resolve its political disputes with Iran and Russia, and the Syrian people are paying the price for that. The US is focusing on solving these disputes, but they are not taking also efficient steps to end the misery of the Syrian people. Do you have a comment on that?
So, Oroba, I'm going to speak to that at the end. My understanding when we began is that we're talking about humanitarian assistance, and I want to focus on that immediately.
You can of course focus on that, and maybe if you want to comment on the question later.
So I'm going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to talk about 4 things that I hope the United States and other Western countries will do, and which I hope organizations like the Arab Organization for Human Rights and others will press Western capitals to do. And then I'm going to take about 3 or 4 minutes and talk about some things Syrians need to do in the face of this humanitarian catastrophe. And let me open by simply expressing my deepest sympathies for Syrians who have suffered so much from not only the civil war, but then this earthquake. It's just heartbreaking. So let me talk a little bit about what I would like to see Western countries, including the United States, do. The first is they're going to need to provide more resources. So far, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, has announced $85 million for Turkey and Syria. That figure is obviously inadequate. It would be inadequate for Turkey alone. It would be inadequate for Syria alone. And for the 2 countries, I look at it as nothing but an initial beginning. And the Congress of the United States is going to have to provide much more assistance given the scale of the disaster. I would like people to remember, and this is important, that the United States has already provided over $16 billion in humanitarian aid to Syria. And I'm going to warn you that when you say nobody helps the Syrians, it is as if you are ignoring big money that Washington has given in the past. You will be much more effective talking to people in Washington if you say, thank you, but we need more, rather than saying no one has ever helped us. It's a little bit of advice from someone with experience in Washington. Second thing which the Americans need to do, and this is really important, is stop waiting for Russia and China to unblock the allowable access routes into Syria. Bab al-Hawa, so far as the one authorized route, the Bashar government on Monday said that they would allow 2 more routes in Bab Salama and Arai. That's great. But I think there needs to be a sort of understanding among Western capitals that international humanitarian law allows them to set aside temporarily concerns about Syrian state sovereignty in order to get life-saving, urgent humanitarian assistance into Syria without a Security Council resolution. And it's not just me saying this. Multiple legal scholars have said this in the past. And in fact, I'm speaking to you from Yale University, and law faculty here at the Yale Law School say the same thing. It is not necessary to get a Security Council resolution ever to get in urgent humanitarian aid into northwestern Syria. I have never understood why the United States continues to wait for Russia on this. They are perfectly capable of building an argument, a strong legal argument, on the basis of international humanitarian law. That would be another thing I think the Americans need to do. A third thing the Americans need to do is to ensure that the American sanctions do not interfere with the operations of humanitarian aid organizers and deliveries into Syria. The Treasury Department in Washington has issued very broad general licenses to facilitate the work of humanitarian aid. We will see how good those licenses work in practice, how well they work in practice. If banks are still nervous about facilitating movements of money to pay for humanitarian assistance and salaries and such things involved in the humanitarian aid effort, the United States Treasury Department is going to have to adjust how it words the general licenses, and it may have to reach out to banks to reassure them that the Treasury is not going to penalize banks for facilitating financial flows in the cause of humanitarian assistance. There's one more thing I'd like the Americans to do, Western countries in general, but certainly the Americans, and that is urgently revise their policy on accepting refugees. The Americans, I think, are in a particularly embarrassing situation here. Last year, 2022, the United States accepted only about 4,300 Syrian refugees. It's a tiny number compared to the number of displaced people, and it is a tiny number compared to the need to help people resettle. It's last year, 4,300. It's a lot better than the Trump administration, where every year they were allowing in less than 500. But the Biden administration should and could do more. And that, I think, it's not going to solve the humanitarian problem in Syria, but it absolutely could help many, many, many Syrian families. So let me turn for just a second before I finish to things which I think Syrians need to do, Syrians in Syria. First, on the Syrian government side, Salima was just talking about the corruption in delivering humanitarian assistance. I think that absolutely has to stop. Part of that is that international foreign aid agencies and organizations need to demand that the Syrian government provide their staffs in Syria wider access without restriction from Syrian security authorities. And that is something which, frankly, could be discussed in the Security Council. It is unacceptable for the Syrian government to block efforts to verify delivery of international humanitarian aid. It's important to remember 90% of the humanitarian aid going in to Syria comes from Western countries, notably the United States and Europe. Japan is also an important donor. The third thing I'd like to see from the Syrian government is that it not restrict cross-line deliveries of humanitarian assistance from Syrian government-controlled areas into opposition-controlled areas in the north and in the northeast. And that too should be a subject of discussion in the Security Council, but not the issue of cross-border aid from Turkey. So there's also things I'd like to see the Syrian opposition do. The first is, and this is really important, is they should stop blocking aid deliveries for political reasons. And I'm talking about the Syrian National Army elements that blocked aid from the autonomous administration. I don't care, frankly, if you like the Syrian Democratic Forces or not. When it comes to delivering humanitarian aid, there is no excuse for blocking convoys into Idlib from the autonomous administration. It's just unacceptable. Second, It is really important. And by the way, I understand that the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham did the same thing with cross-line assistance coming up from Syrian government-controlled areas. It's unacceptable. I don't care if HTS or the Syrian National Army don't like the Assad regime. Who likes the Assad regime? No one. But this is a point about saving lives, and blocking humanitarian aid convoys for political reasons is just, as a matter of principle, unacceptable, whether the Syrian government does it or the Syrian opposition. My last point. It's really important for especially the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but also for Syrian National Army elements to understand security concerns of foreign aid workers. Here in the United States, I'm speaking to you from Connecticut. The memory of Americans who went to Syria to try to help, journalists like Jim Foley or aid workers like Kayla Mueller, and their kidnapping and their subsequent murder is still very fresh. When I was talking to an important American newspaper reporter who has worked in the Middle East for years, I said, you know, we need to get journalists like you into northern Syria. He said, well, what about safety? And he specifically mentioned Jim Foley. So there have to be guarantees of the safety of foreigners who come in, whether they're journalists or aid workers. There have to be measures taken to ensure that they are made safe while they're in the country, and that they have at the same time access so that they can do the monitoring of aid deliveries or do reporting about what's happening on the ground and publicize that here in the United States. I have seen a few reporters from the Washington Post and NPR go into parts of northern Syria around Afrin, and I think a BBC crew just went to Idlib, and I think those are all positive developments, but we need much more of that. So I'm going to stop there, and would you like me now, Orba, to talk about what you asked me?
I don't know if, I don't think we have actually enough time.
Okay.
But thank you so much for all the important points that you've raised. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but unfortunately, there's not enough time. So
and I have to go teach my class here at Yale.
Oh, okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. We will move now to our next speaker, Tom Harb, who is an American analyst and former co-chair of the American Mid East Coalition for Democracy. Please, Tom, go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me on this special cause. Last week, our delegation from the American Middle East Coalition, we were in Washington talking to members of Congress and also talking to the State Department. And the State Department wanted to send a very, very clear message that any sanctions on Syria, in case of a humanitarian assistance to Syria, are completely exempt from any sanctions. And there were some countries and some banks a little concerned. So that's why the Treasury Department issued kind of a blanket statement that all humanitarian assistance are exempt for 180 days just to get the assistance they need in Syria. And the former ambassador just stated it as well. From that angle, I think that the coverage from the United States is strong to send a strong message to everybody that they cannot just use the sanctions as a reason not to send any assistance. The second thing, we were talking to different organizations, non-profit organizations, because we know, like the ambassador stated a little while ago, that the $85 million, which Samantha Power stated, is on the low side. And we know it's on the low side, but there are plenty of other organizations. One of them is Caritas, is raising money throughout the United States throughout churches and some other places to send to Syria, and a lot of people, they are donated. Third thing, I think that's where I disagree a little bit with the ambassador, that UN should be a meeting at the UN, immediate meeting, to make sure, even if they need to provide UN helmets on the ground to provide the access roads and facilitate the access roads to get the help to Syria, it should come over there, and that's why the UN meeting is necessary. Legally, probably you don't need it under humanitarians, but I think you need the international community to send some kind of troops to protect from different factions. Either they are gonna steal the humanitarian aid, or it's not gonna let it get to different places. At least they'll open the roadway for these routes. Also, furthermore, we suggested that they will talk to the Lebanese government and get a couple airports in northern Lebanon and land the planes right there. One of them is Clayat Airport in the region of Akkar in North Lebanon, and the port also of Tripoli in northern Lebanon. It will be so closer to provide the aid to Syria. We are really disappointed a little bit on the Arab nations in the help into Syria. I think still a little bit shy. It could be much longer, much bigger to send to Syria, and they need to do something to expedite it and make the impact needs. And we discussed also the long term, other than the short term, because the short term now, obviously, to help the people to find, to provide movable hospitals, to provide tents and so on, and to get the immigration to the United States from Syria. I don't know why the ambassador, this became an issue to him, but however, I think the Syrians should remain in Syria. We need to provide them the help they need to stay in their own land. Already 50-60% of the population of Syria outside Syria. Bashar al-Assad should not have the luxury of controlling Syria any longer. The Iranian regime should not have the luxury to change the demography inside Syria. That would be a bad decision, I think. So they need to be careful, because these bad actors, they take advantage of crises, and those crises should be well maintained by the international community and by the Arab world. And those would be my remarks, unless there's any questions from anybody else.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was very insightful. I would like also to thank all the speakers for their patience. And we have next our speaker, Yasin Aktay, who's a Turkish academic and writer. Yasin, we have 7 minutes for your talk. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And first, I want to explain my own condolences to all my citizens in Turkey and in Syria also. Sorry?
Sorry, Yasin, we also would like to send our condolences.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you know, the earthquake is influencing about 14 cities, including, of course, the cities inside Syria, and 11 in Turkey. It is always referred as 10, but there is Elazığ also is being influenced, and it was declared tonight as the 11th city for emergency. And there was many buildings destroyed, destructed there. But of course, there is no deaths, alhamdulillah. But regarding this, unfortunately, yes, in the focus is on Turkey, the earthquake on Turkey, but the Syrian people have been influenced, and more than I think so far has been recorded about 6,000 more, even more than 6,000 people has been killed in that earthquake. And these people, and the situation was very bad in that if if there was any disaster inside Syria, Turkey was enough. Turkey was enough to go there and to help there sufficiently. And even in spite of its own occupation with its own problem or its own disaster, Turkey is trying to do its best even inside Syria, but it's not enough, as it's not enough to deliver all the help, all the aids within Turkey also at the early time, of course. But by time, thankfully, fortunately, many points have been receiving many all the aids from from all parts of Turkey. There is a sort of emergency situation in Turkey now, and all the citizens of Turkey, Turkey has been one heart and one and all have been mobilized to go. And now there is some campaigns to collect together many aids for the humanitarian for these victims of the earthquake. But as for the Syria, unfortunately, this situation, I mean, this emergency situation has been going on since 11 or 12 years. The situation was not much better than, or even sometimes it was worse than any earthquake situation. And the reason for that situation, that emergency situation, is the regime itself. And now when we think about delivering all the aids, why the regime, and that is not helpful. And we see when Bashar Assad visited the disastrous places, I mean the disaster cities in Halep, as if he was in a sort of wedding, in sort of celebration. He was very. There was no any trace from sadness in his face. He was taking his selfies, and as if he was taking his revenge. I mean, God has, or the nature has taken his revenge from these people. He was not sad, and he is not feeling any sort of condolence or any sort of any sort of good feeling for these people, and to share their pain, to share their condolences. So also the help, the aids that is coming from outside via the regime, we cannot go. We don't estimate that, and we don't expect to go to the real, I mean, targets or to the victims of the earthquake. Just on the contrary, we expect, or I don't say I am afraid. It is obvious, the aids will not go to these people, and the people are should be in a sort of self-destination. I mean, except of course from Turkish side, on the opposition side, some doors were closed, and unfortunately, the international regulations to transfer all the humanitarian aids to this area, to the opposition area, is coming only from Russia or from via the regime. That's the restriction, and this restriction should be exceeded. Otherwise, no any real humanitarian can go, and this area, this region would left alone by its own people only, and they are helping themselves. I think they are helping themselves, and because they had some experiences in being bombed by the airstrikes of Syria, or of the regime of Russia, and so they don't expect. I mean, the people of this region are not expecting any help from Russia or from these international, and that is a shameful situation indeed for the humanity, and for the United Nations, or for the United Nations, yes. And we should do something about this, I think. And the former speaker has told that the United Nations should not be restricted to some resolutions. I mean, independent resolutions to go there. We should find some way for making some de facto situation to interfere. Otherwise, I think United States has no any excuse. United States has no any excuse in not be able to go there for humanitarian aid, because its existence and its presence in the region now in Syria is a de facto situation. It is not nobody has invited the United States there, but it came for fighting terrorism, not fighting earthquake is much legitimate to undertake. And you are going to help people who are being killed. Is it more legitimate to go to fight some terrorists who are targeting some people, for example, very limited people, and to save the life of the people? And your excuse is to save the people of somebody from the earthquake threat, but the terrorism threat. But the earthquake threat is more wider situation, and creates you more humanitarian responsibility to go there. Even though, I mean, you should also considering that you are there, given the fact that you are already there. I mean, de facto situation, you are already there, and you know, United States has no any excuse. It can do anything bypassing the regime and delivering all the humanitarian aids in any time, simultaneously with the Turkey now is being criticized for not delivering some humanitarian aids simultaneously just minutes after the earthquake. So it was impossible, of course. But after hours, after very few hours, we can say after only few hours, you could see all the institutions of Turkey, all the humanitarian aids, vehicles, and all the people, the voluntaries or the officials of emergency institution of Turkey were there in the area and in the field, and they were trying to do their best, and thankfully, fortunately, and we can be proud of what has been done for their own citizens, and we could expect the same thing from United States. I mean, United States has no. I think we can forget about anything.
Sorry, we're running out of time for your intervention.
Just we can forget about everybody, every part, but we cannot forget about the responsibility of United States. Has much more responsibility in this area because they are already there. They have no any excuse. Thank you
so much, Yassine, for the really important and insightful comments that you've made. And especially about how the humanitarian intervention is being very politicized and it's preventing the delivery of aid for many people in Syria. We're gonna move to our next speaker, Nabil Khouri, who's a former American diplomat. Nabil, you have 7 minutes for your talk. Thank you so much in advance.
Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted? I think so. All right, so to be brief, listening to all the different interventions, the earthquake, of course, has killed tens of thousands of Syrians, Turks, third country nationals who were visiting, or migrants or aid workers. So it affected a very large and diverse group of people. But the Syrians in particular have suffered what we call here a triple whammy, 3 big blows. One of them is from nature, a natural disaster. One of them is from the failed state where they're supposed to be living and thriving. And one of them from a failing international system, which is frankly too complicated and too troubled by politics to properly cover the humanitarian needs of the people. The quake itself, I mean, natural disasters is not much anybody can do except perhaps to improve the ability to predict This is an area which has been devastated for the past century. More than 20 large quakes, and perhaps this last one is the largest. But certainly scientists all over the world know that this area is vulnerable, and the scientists should give us ways of improving the ability to predict and the ability to prepare for such events. And very likely such events will happen again. So hopefully the world will be better prepared. Now, the international system, and here we can blame the UN and the Charter, but we all know the UN is very hard to fix. The UN Security Council that works for the 5 big powers, each one having a veto power, and when they cannot agree, someone will veto the decision of the others, and so they cannot act. I think Robert Ford correctly pointed to where the UN can act without waiting for a Security Council resolution. This area, this line should be better demarcated between where you wait on the Security Council and where you can just go in. The problem, of course, is both for the UN and for US aid, is security. If you go in without guarantees from the 5 major powers, somebody from the major powers or people acting on their behalf on the ground can not only derail the convoys, but also threaten the security of those delivering the aid. Unfortunately, the wrangling between all the powers has delayed the aid. The Secretary General, acting without Security Council approval, authorized the opening of a second gate, the Bab al-Salama, from Turkey. But that came 8 days after the disaster struck. So a bit late, and perhaps he was waiting on the big powers for approval at first. And also the aid from northeast Syria to northwest Syria was only allowed, and the news is that several trucks have been allowed to pass from east to west, and that's a very good thing. But that has taken 10 days in which thousands of lives could have been saved, and thousands more could have been assisted with food and medical attention. So again, the politics of that did not work as well as it should have. The gate situation from Turkey into Syria, there should be several. I think Turkey has said that it's willing to open more gates if the big powers would approve. And of course, some of them up till today do not approve. The regime in Damascus wants the aid to pass through Damascus as a way of getting their recognition back, getting them back into the international community. Turkey, of course, also wants to centralize and wants Ankara and Istanbul to be centers for the distribution of international aid. The Russians are trying to help the Assad regime regain recognition, and that has been a problem. All these political things have to be worked out, but I'm not sure that they will be worked out. I think the least of it is humanitarian gates and humanitarian access should be agreed upon. We've heard of a rapprochement between Erdogan and Bashar al-Assad. Well, there are major issues probably that they will never agree on, but at least on delivering humanitarian aid. They should be able to work out access points and not care too much whether the central government is controlling that or not. And my suggestion for the US in particular, why do they wait on the Russians? Robert Ford asked, but they wait because there may well be a problem on the ground. And there already is a lot of tension between the US and Russia over Ukraine. If the US acted without the green light from Russia and others, there may well be violence on the ground. I suggest that, you know, if the US sanctions policy has not worked, they don't like the Assad regime, but they don't want to remove it themselves. They want the Syrian people to remove Assad. The compromise position has been to levy sanctions, so-called Caesar's Act and others. Problem with these sanctions is they have hurt the Syrian people. They have not bothered the Assad regime too much. I think the US should be able to act either independently or through non-governmental organizations, specifically for humanitarian aid. Med Global and SAMS, the Syrian American Medical Society, both have done tremendous work in northern Syria and other places in the region, supplying doctors and medical staff and medical equipment and medications. The US and Europe could work through organizations like this that are trustworthy and that are in direct contact with the people in need on the ground, so that if Americans, for them, it's problematic to go in directly, work indirectly through these civilian organizations. As I say, I'm afraid it's already too late for thousands of lives. But the humanitarian aid for those living is going to be needed for a long time to come. And hopefully lessons will be drawn from the mistakes and obstacles which faced the humanitarian aid this time. And perhaps when the next disaster strikes, we will all be better prepared. And thank you all for your patience.
Thank you so much, Nabil, for your really important and insightful comments. I would like to go next for our actually last but not least speaker, Raed As-Saleh, who is the head of the Syrian Civil Defense, the White Helmets, who will be talking to us about how things are on the ground now, and also about the obstacles and challenges they have been facing in the rescue operations. Raed will be speaking in Arabic, and I'll be doing the translation for him in English. But I would also like to take this opportunity again to thank all the speakers for this really dynamic and insightful discussion. Raed, بتفضل رح تحكي بالعربي وأنا رح أترجم للإنجليزي، بس بالبداية بحب أقدم خالص التعازي لإلكم على ضحايا الزلزال، وبنقدم تضامننا الكبير مع كل الدفاع المدني السوري بالأماكن بشمال سوريا بأماكن المعارضة، ونقدم لكم كل الدعم. تفضل رائد.
السلام عليكم. هل الترجمة رح تكون تتابعية أم فورية؟ بس مش عارف كيف بدي.
ممكن تحكي شوي وأنا بترجم بعدين.
أوكي شكرا. السلام عليكم أول شيء، وشكرا كثير للاستضافة، وشكرا للمتحدثين السابقين. بعتذر إني التحقت فيكم متأخر، ولكن يعني في بعض الأمور بتكون خارج عن إرادتنا بهاي المحنة العصيبة.
Raed thanks everyone attending, and he's sorry that he joined late, but it was difficult to find time for this webinar because of everything happening.
الكل بيعرف حجم الكارثي، ما بتوقع في حدا صار بعيد عن الموضوع. الناس صارت تعرف إنه صار في كارثة كتير كبيرة، ولكن إذا بدنا نحكي عن الكارثة ونضل نحكي عنها لوقت طويل جدا، أكيد ما راح نكون قادرين نلاقي حلول والمشاكل اللي واجهتنا أثناء الاستجابة لهذه الكارثة. لذلك أنا حابب أحكي عن المشاكل وعن الحلول اللي ممكن تصير.
Yeah, it says that the earthquake has caused massive scale of violence, and everyone is aware now of the scale of destruction that the earthquake has caused. But we should be now thinking of practical steps to do in the risk, like how can we better do rescue operations and the obstacles that they faced while doing the rescue operations in the north of Syria.
ودي استغل وجود السيد ياسين أقطاي لوجه تعزية باسم يعني لشعبنا بسوريا وللشعب التركي أيضا اللي بفقدانه هذا العدد من الأرواح، وأكيد حتى السوريين اللي فقدوا حياتهم بتركيا.
I also would like to take this opportunity that Yasin is here to send his deep condolences about the victims of the earthquake, either like the Syrian victims living in Turkey or the Turkish people who were killed by the earthquake. And he expresses his solidarity and condolences.
الحقيقة منذ اللحظة الأولى للزلزال نحن استنفرنا كافة فرق الدفاع المدني القوات البيضاء بكل شمال غرب سوريا، استجبنا للمناطق المتضررة بشكل كتير كبير، والحقيقة كان يعني استمر العمل حتى أول البارحة بطاقة 100%. كنا على مدار الساعة كل فرقنا كانت عم تشتغل بكل المناطق.
We called upon all the rescue teams in northern southwestern part of Syria to come and help in the rescue operations. And since the earthquake up until 2 days ago, they were working at 100% capacity, trying to as much as they could to rescue the people stuck under the rubble and to do rescue operations.
منذ اللحظة اللي أنا فعلياً طلعت كشفت على كل المواقع اللي فيها الزلزال، كان يعني قدرت إنه نحن بحاجة لمساعدة ونحن بحاجة لدعم لحتى نقدر نحن لحالنا كنا بهذاك الوقت ما راح نقدر نشيل كل هذا الحمل، لأنه هو أكبر من حجم المنظمة وأكبر من طاقتها.
Once the earthquake hit, I surveyed all the areas that were affected by it and realized that the scale of destruction they will not be able to help and rescue with this amount of destruction. They needed more efforts and teams to be helping them, because it was a big responsibility that they couldn't take alone.
فعليا منذ يعني اكتشافنا أولا أعلنا حالة الطوارئ في ضمن المؤسسة، واستدعينا كل العاملين اللي موجودين في بيوتهم واللي حاصلين على إجازات، وكل الموجودين بيقدروا بيشتغلوا بالبحث والإنقاذ.
We declared an emergency situation in the organization, and we called all the workers and staff members who were either in a holiday or not working to come and join the rescue teams.
بعدها تم إعلان أيضا المناطق هذه اللي تعرضت للزلزال هي مناطق منكوبة وبحاجة لمساعدة عاجلة.
And then we declared all the areas that were hit by the earthquake as areas that are lived through a disaster, and we called for a quick and urgent help.
لاحقا تم إطلاق عدة مناشدات من الأمم المتحدة ولغيرها من الدول حتى يتم تلبية الاحتياجات بشكل سريع حتى نقدر نكمل عمليات البحث والإنقاذ.
Later, we did many appeals to the United Nations and other international organizations to send aid and help and to support them in the rescue and search operations.
لأنه مثل ما بتعرفوا المنطقة اللي نحن عم نشتغل فيها هي أصلاً كانت تعاني من نقص بالتمويل، وكانت تعاني من ضعف في الخدمات الصحية وغيرها، وهذا الشيء أدى لإغلاق أكثر من 20 مركز طبي قبل شهرين من الآن.
In the areas where we operate, these areas are already faced dire infrastructure and not adequate resources, and the health sector has been really suffering in the past 2 months, especially. There has been a real shortage of equipment and medical aid.
تفاجأنا أنه الاستجابة الأولى هي كانت من المدنيين ومن السوريين الموجودين داخل سوريا وخارج سوريا. طلبنا نحن الآليات، طلبنا المعدات، فعليا صارت توصلنا آليات من كل المناطق. كل المتعهدي البناء أرسلوا آلياتهم، كل متعهدي العمل بالمقالع الأحجار أرسلوا آليات وحطوها تحت تصرفنا. فعليا هذا ساعدنا كثير، بالإضافة للدعم المادي، التبرع الفوري من المدنيين اللي فعليا أنا كان قبل شوي معي قيمة تبرع قلت لهم بدي أحطها ببرواز. طفل سوري اجى لعنا قريب من مكان الإدارة تبعنا، اجى وقال أنا سمعت إنه بدكم حق ديزل معه 5 ليرات، قال أنا هاي مجمعة من العيد أعطاني إياه وقال لي مشان تقدروا تساعدوا. فهذا بصراحة يعني أنا هذا الشيء اللي خلانا نصمد، هذا الشيء اللي خلانا نستمر، هذا الشيء اللي خلانا نخلص شغلنا.
We were shocked at the beginning when we sent appeals to help us, that like the help came first from civilians inside Syria and also Syrians who live from the outside. They were the first to respond to this tragedy, and even the contractors and like people who work in construction work, they were sending their trucks and sending equipment and sending everything that could help in the rescue and search operations and in removing the rubble. It was a very touching thing that civilians who were the first ones to respond, and without them it would have been much difficult. And also in addition to the support of them sending aids and equipment, they were also sending money. So they were really helping the people in the northwest of Syria. And without their support, things would have been much difficult. And then Ra'id mentioned a story of a little boy who donated 5 liras or
5 Turkish lira.
5 Turkish lira تركية، وحكى إنه هذا كان مصري. Sorry, I'm speaking Arabic now. And he said that this is his like pocket money, and he gave it to the White Helmets as donation. And it was a very touching thing for Ra'id, how all people came together as one.
لذلك يعني حقيقة يعني ولكن نحن صدمنا أنه الأمم المتحدة بدأت تصرح أرقام إنه نحن ما استجبنا إلا ل5%. هذا 3 يوم من الزلزال، رغم إنه كنا مغطيين 100%. كنا عم ننتشل كل الضحايا المصابين والناس، حتى الجثامين عم يتم انتشالها كان من تحت الأنقاض. والأمم المتحدة بهاي الفترة كانت نشرت كثير معلومات مضللة للرأي العام الدولي وللدول، ونحن فعليا كنا نضطر ما بس ننقذ الناس، كنا نضطر نقول لهم إنه هذا الكلام غير صحيح وإلى الآن ما وصل شيء، وهذا الكلام غير صحيح وهي ما عم تعطي تقارير صحيحة. أنا مستغرب حقيقة من أداء الأمم المتحدة بهاي الكارثة، كيف هي صارت بدها تنشر معلومات مضللة حتى تغطي على تقصيرها بالاستجابة الإنسانية.
The United Nations have been spreading misleading information that they were sending help to Syria, but in reality they were not sending anything, and they were using this deceiving information to cover on the fact that they were not actually sending support and aid for Syrians. And they had to face these 2 challenges. One is taking people out of the rubble and dealing with this tragedy on the ground, and on the other hand, responding to the lies by the United Nations that they were sending aids, but they were not. رائد، لأن سوري ما في وقت كتير، فإذا بتحب تلخص.
راح آخذ آخر فقرة راح أحكي عنها بس.
شكرا جزيلا.
طبعا هي تحججت كثير الأمم المتحدة بموضوع المعابر، كانت تقول إنه تركيا هي سكرت المعابر رغم إنه كانت المعابر مفتوحة، ولكن اكتشفنا مع مرور الوقت إنه هي فعليا بدها موافقة بشار الأسد. يعني هي ما بس بدها تهينش، ما بس إنه ما بدها تقدم كانت المساعدة، هي بدها حاصرنا في مكان وتقول لنا يا ضحية، يا لازم تقبلوا الأكل من قاتلكم، يا أما بدكم تموتوا بالجوع وما حدا بده يساعدكم. هذا الرسالة اللي كانت واضحة لنا من الأمم المتحدة، بالرغم هي كانت عم تستخدم مصطلحات تانية. إيه صح، هي عم تستخدم مصطلحات غير هاي، ولكن هاي الرسالة اللي وصلت للشعب السوري. ولذلك الشعب السوري كثير مستاء من أداء الأمم المتحدة، وكثير مستاء حقيقة من أنه هذا الموضوع ممكن يمر. لذلك مطالبتنا دائما، يعني مثل ما كثير بدول العالم قالوا انه الامم المتحده صار في حاجه لاعاده هيكله، هي فعليا بحاجه لاعاده هيكله، وخاصه طريقه الاستجابه الانسانيه للمناطق. لازم تكون الامم المتحده حياديه اكثر وغير مصطفى مع القتله والمجرمين بمناطق من العالم، ولازم يكون في عمل واضح وصريح وفي تحقيق على التقصير اللي صار في الامم المتحده لحتى يتم المحاسبه لاحقا على هذا التقصير.
The United Nations have been using the excuse of the borders to say that they can't deliver aid to Syria, but in reality, they were delivering aids through the Syrian regime, and the Syrian people are deeply disappointed by the actions taken by the United Nations in this earthquake. The United Nations shouldn't politicize a humanitarian intervention and should be neutral in its delivery of aid for everyone. The United Nations, as well as an organization, needs restructuring because the way they operate now is not sustainable and it's not equitable for everyone. Syrians are very, very disappointed by the failure of the United Nations in saving and sending adequate resources and aid delivery for Syrians. رائد، شكرا كتير على المداخلة اللي أعطيتها وكل النقاط المهمة اللي حكيت عنها بمداخلتك، ويعطيكم ألف عافية بالدفاع المدني السوري. أكيد يعني الشغل أكبر من الحمل، وإن شاء الله يعني الأمور بتكون أحسن بالأيام القادمة.
شكرا جزيلا.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raed, and thank you for everyone who joined us this evening for this webinar. I would like to thank the speakers who are here for their time and for continuous support for human rights and for just causes everywhere. I would like to thank you again and hopefully see you in the upcoming webinar. Good night.